The tuition room seemed ordinary to anyone who glanced through the window from the street. Small, unassuming, tucked above closed shops, it was a space meant for learning. Parents trusted it. Students feared it. But within these walls, the foundation of control had been laid over years. Chalk dust hung in the air like a warning, silent yet pervasive. Little did anyone know, the silence itself was part of a ritual, a prelude to events that would shock the entire community. Every detail, every routine, was part of a plan that had been slowly forming behind these walls for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal its dark purpose. Sir Adeel was a man whose calm was almost terrifying. He never smiled. He never raised his voice. His presence alone commanded obedience. Parents trusted him implicitly because his results were unmatched. Students obeyed because fear had replaced curiosity. To the world, he was disciplined and efficient. But those who studied him closely would later understand that behind those pale, unblinking eyes was a mind driven by ritual, compulsion, and the need to dominate every detail of life around him. Every movement, every instruction, every pause was calculated. A lesson in obedience that masked a far darker reality. Students whispered stories about the chalk. Not jokes, not exaggerations, but strange, undeniable habits. Sir Adeel would break pieces, place them in his mouth, and chew slowly, deliberately, while the lesson continued. At the time, parents thought it harmless, even nervous habit. But forensic psychologists later described it as a ritual, a way of asserting dominance, internalizing control. Chalk, traditionally a symbol of education, became part of his method, a physical representation of authority that children absorbed without realizing. This quiet, ritualistic behavior, once dismissed, would later signal a mind capable of far darker actions, waiting silently for the perfect opportunity. Every student in that classroom lived under constant scrutiny. Mistakes were noted, recorded, and never ignored. The pressure to perform, to obey, to comply was relentless. Some thrived. Others broke quietly, slipping through the cracks of a system that rewarded results but ignored emotional cost. Parents were focused on grades, unaware of the fear that settled like a shadow over the children. For investigators, this pattern of psychological manipulation would later become central evidence, revealing a consistent method. Control through fear disguised as discipline, obedience disguised as mentorship. The children were not just students. They were variables in a larger plan, unknowingly participating in a dangerous experiment. Classes often ran late into the night, long after city streets had emptied and shops had shuttered. Children walked home alone, trusting the schedule and the man who demanded obedience. The darkness outside mirrored the isolation inside. Investigators would later note that the late hours were deliberate. Isolation ensured compliance. Isolation concealed opportunity. It was during these late hours, in silence and shadow, that Sir Adeel's most methodical and chilling acts were executed. The combination of trust, fear, and solitude created a setting where a single misstep could never be forgiven, and where authority became absolute. In the corner of the classroom, a locked metal cabinet held more than student records. Each file contained grades, yes, but also behavioral notes, attendance irregularities, compliance levels. Every child was observed, catalogued, and ranked. Nothing was left to chance. Forensic investigators later described this as the blueprint of control. Every habit, every flaw documented meticulously. It was here that the architecture of manipulation was stored, silent, waiting for the right moment to enforce the rules Sir Adeel alone determined. The cabinet was both symbol and tool, a quiet testament to the obsessive mind it represented. On one October evening, a student never returned home. His school bag remained on the empty bench, a silent witness to the unfolding horror. At first, authorities suspected a runaway. But children do not leave behind their belongings unless something more sinister has occurred. For the family, the night stretched endlessly, punctuated by panic and confusion. Investigators would later pinpoint this as the turning point, the moment when a seemingly ordinary classroom revealed itself as a site of calculated danger. The absence of the boy, juxtaposed with the order of the classroom, created an unsettling paradox. The scene appeared normal, yet contained evidence of a crime meticulously planned. When police finally entered the classroom, silence had become oppressive. Flashlights cut through the dust-filled air, revealing traces of disturbance. Smudged chalk, wiped floors, subtle signs of struggle. Every corner, every desk became a potential clue. Investigators worked methodically, cataloging each anomaly. What had once been a space of learning was transformed into a crime scene where every detail mattered. They noted how deliberate the placement of objects seemed. Nothing about the disruption was accidental. Every movement suggested calculation, every absence implied intent. The room itself was a witness, and for the first time, its story began to unfold. Beneath the floorboards, investigators discovered objects that hinted at premeditation. Latex gloves, plastic ties, a partially damaged voice recorder, all carefully hidden. The placement suggested forethought and a methodical approach. Forensic analysis would later reveal the recorder contained fragments of sound, nearly silent, capturing only rhythm and movement, a shadow of the crime itself. These items transformed suspicion into certainty. This was no impulsive act. It was the execution of a plan refined over years. The objects were mundane, but in context, they painted a chilling portrait. A mind capable of using order and ritual to commit something unthinkable. A landfill miles from the city became the final chapter of the immediate search. Among heaps of refuse, investigators recovered fragments of clothing matching the missing child. DNA testing confirmed the worst fears. The crime that had begun behind closed doors now extended into the open, leaving physical evidence impossible to ignore. The investigation expanded, connecting years of pattern and behavior to one chilling night. The meticulousness of the act, the planning, the disposal, the manipulation became clear. The ordinary classroom, once a sanctuary, had been a stage for a crime that demonstrated the depths of obsession, the limits of control, and the tragic vulnerability of innocence. Sir Adeel's apartment reflected the same meticulous control that governed his teaching. Every item had its place. Clothes folded with precision. Notebooks aligned by size and content. Walls were bare, cold, and unwelcoming. Investigators later noted that there were no photographs, no mementos, no signs of personal relationships. He had removed any trace of connection to the outside world, leaving only a system he could dominate. This isolation was not accidental. It was deliberate, part of the same obsessive mind that cataloged children as variables. It allowed him to focus entirely on control, on precision, on ritual. In these walls, every day became a rehearsal for authority. Investigators would later say that understanding the apartment was critical to understanding his psychology. Order replaced empathy, and detachment replaced emotion. The crime was rooted here long before it appeared in the classroom, in a life carefully curated to enforce absolute control. Forensic accountants uncovered an intricate web of financial maneuvering. Sir Adeel collected cash payments from students, deposited them in staggered amounts, and split them across several informal accounts. Prepaid cards, gift vouchers, and small currency exchanges masked the origin of the money. Investigators realized this was not mere frugality but a deliberate attempt to hide assets and prepare for an escape. Months before the crime, online searches revealed he had been investigating visas, temporary work abroad, and cash-based employment systems with minimal regulation. Every transaction, every decision was calculated. The finances were a roadmap to premeditation. When combined with evidence from the classroom, CCTV footage, and witness testimony, the money trail illuminated a chilling truth. The crime was planned meticulously, financially and psychologically, over an extended period, and executed with cold precision. CCTV footage became pivotal in tracing Sir Adeel's movements. One camera captured him leaving the tuition center alone, carrying a heavy duffel bag, composed and deliberate. Another grainy shot showed him disposing of an object in a municipal container hours later. Investigators analyzed the footage frame by frame, noting posture, gait, and timing. Each movement suggested careful planning, not panic. Sir Adeel believed the darkness and grainy resolution hid him, but every action left a trail. By tracking the footage alongside mobile phone pings and toll booth records, Authorities reconstructed his route, revealing a calculated attempt to evade law enforcement. The video evidence, initially overlooked, confirmed intent and method. The ordinary streets and empty night now became part of a narrative that exposed the precision and cold logic of a mind obsessed with control, where every step was premeditated and every action executed with quiet deliberation. Psychologists examining Sir Adeel described traits consistent with psychopathy: superficial charm, shallow emotions, grandiose sense of self, and complete lack of empathy. Behavioral analysts highlighted his obsession with control, not just over children's academics but over their emotional and social worlds. Investigators noted patterns in his private notes. Children were cataloged by vulnerability, emotional instability, and obedience. Every lesson, every punishment, every late-night session contributed to reinforcing his dominance. The chalk-eating ritual was interpreted as both compulsion and assertion of authority, a grounding mechanism to internalize control physically. In essence, Sir Adeel had created an environment where authority became absolute, fear was normalized, and compliance was expected without question. The psychological profile provided critical insight into how meticulously the crime was orchestrated, revealing a mind that fused discipline, ritual, and manipulation into a dangerous formula that preyed on trust. The manhunt extended for weeks, covering urban and rural landscapes. Mobile phone pings, toll booth records, and eyewitness accounts were meticulously analyzed to predict Sir Adeel's movements. Authorities recognized a pattern. He moved slowly, deliberately, circling areas rather than fleeing directly, suggesting indecision and an attachment to control. Roadside cameras and fuel station CCTV provided the first concrete sightings, revealing his cautious approach. Every choice he made was calculated, but the cumulative effect of evidence, financial traces, digital footprints, and eyewitness reports began to tighten the net. Investigators realized the crime was not impulsive but methodical, executed by someone who meticulously planned both the act and the aftermath. The manhunt was as much psychological as logistical, requiring the team to think like the criminal, anticipating the behavior of a mind addicted to control. He was finally located inside an abandoned school building, a classroom familiar yet empty. Investigators found him seated calmly at the front desk, chalk on the table, facing empty benches. This location was symbolic. Control over an empty room mirrored the control he had sought over children. It was a place devoid of life but filled with ritual. The discovery stunned authorities. He did not resist. Silence, his lifelong tool, became his final shield. Psychologists later noted the significance. Sir Adeel gravitated toward spaces where he could impose order, and even in isolation, his identity as an authority figure remained unbroken. The arrest, though physical, represented a psychological unraveling, the ultimate confrontation between control and consequence. The arrest itself was startling in its quiet. Sir Adeel complied fully, showing no visible resistance. Observers described his demeanor as composed yet detached, as if the loss of control in that moment was almost a relief. Investigators later reflected that his cooperation indicated a profound reliance on order. He could not function without structured systems. The arrest marked the end of his freedom but did not diminish his meticulous nature. In custody, he continued routines, maintaining personal organization, documenting interactions, and observing authority. The stark contrast between his calm exterior and the horror of his crime created a chilling tension, demonstrating that the most dangerous individuals often present no outward chaos, only carefully maintained control. During interrogation, Sir Adeel provided minimal responses. He did not deny responsibility, but framed his actions as corrective, necessary, and inevitable. Experts later described his effect as emotionally detached, showing no guilt or empathy. He referred to the victim as a failed variable, revealing the same analytical, clinical perspective seen in his notebooks. Investigators noted the consistency between his explanations and his methodical behavior, control, measurement, and calculated action. This psychological insight confirmed premeditation and rationalization. The interrogation highlighted the chilling reality that some perpetrators view morality through a personal lens, where results supersede humanity. In this room, The contrast between meticulous reasoning and devastating harm became palpable, leaving the team with an acute understanding of the mind that orchestrated years of calculated manipulation. The trial was a national spectacle, drawing attention to the chilling methods Sir Adeel employed. Prosecutors presented evidence meticulously. Financial records, CCTV footage, forensic findings, witness testimonies, and patterns from years of tuition. The courtroom became a theater of methodical revelation, each piece of evidence demonstrating premeditation, control, and ritual. Former students described years of psychological manipulation, late-night sessions, and subtle fear enforced through silence. Parents recounted misplaced trust, emphasizing how his disciplined persona masked predation. Experts analyzed the chalk ritual, obsessive cataloging, and meticulous record-keeping, illustrating the mind behind the method. Every day of the trial reinforced the gravity of the crime, revealing how systems that prioritize results over emotional well-being can be exploited by those skilled at manipulating authority. The verdict was life imprisonment without parole. Sir Adeel remained calm, almost eerily detached, while the courtroom absorbed the weight of justice. For parents and survivors, relief was mixed with grief, as no sentence could undo the trauma endured. Legal experts praised the thoroughness of evidence collection, noting that financial planning, premeditation, psychological manipulation, and forensic recovery contributed to an airtight case. The chalk-eating teacher, once feared and revered, had been finally subdued by law. Yet the trial also sparked nationwide reflection on how authority and discipline, when unchallenged, can mask abuse. It became clear that vigilance, empathy, and accountability are critical safeguards against manipulation by those who understand control better than anyone else. In the aftermath, parents wrestled with guilt and sorrow. Many realized they had ignored subtle warning signs. Late-night sessions, emotional withdrawal, excessive discipline. They reflected on how ambition, trust, and the desire for academic success allowed manipulation to flourish unchecked. The crime forced an unflinching look at the vulnerability of children in environments dominated by authority without oversight. Families described years of silent anxiety in hindsight, recognizing how small anomalies accumulated into a system of control that ultimately enabled tragedy. This remorse underscored the broader lesson. Vigilance and intuition are as critical as trust, and no one should assume that professional appearance alone guarantees safety. The pieces of chalk, once an innocuous teaching tool, were now evidence sealed in bags. Forensic experts examined bite marks, residue, and placement, linking them definitively to Sir Adeel. The ritualistic habit, initially dismissed as quirky, became a key insight into his psychological state. The chalk symbolized authority absorbed and internalized, a tangible manifestation of his obsession with control. Investigators emphasized its significance. Even the smallest overlooked detail can illuminate motives and behavioral patterns. The mundane object transformed into a critical piece of a puzzle, reminding viewers that in true crime, ritual and symbolism often intertwine with method, offering rare windows into a criminal mind that thrives on meticulous domination and psychological manipulation. Years later, the classroom was unrecognizable. Fresh paint, clean walls, and modern benches replaced the space once marked by fear, ritual, and meticulous control. Yet, for survivors and investigators, memory lingered like dust in the air. The room no longer housed terror, but it could not erase the history. Every sunlight beam that illuminated the benches reminded those aware of what had occurred. Innocence exploited under the guise of discipline, trust violated, and control weaponized. Renovation did not undo trauma. The classroom, though physically transformed, remained a symbol of a lesson far more profound, that vigilance and awareness are essential safeguards against unseen predators who hide behind structure and authority. The story of Sir Adeel serves as a cautionary tale. Evil does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, measured and methodical, hidden behind routine, structure, and authority. Dust floats in the sun like the remnants of silence that allowed control to flourish unnoticed. Systems can fail when oversight is absent, and trust without accountability can be exploited. True crime reminds us that awareness is a vital defense, that even the most ordinary spaces can harbor darkness, and that subtle rituals often conceal extraordinary cruelty. Reflection, vigilance, and critical observation are the tools that prevent history from repeating itself. The lessons linger in light, shadows, and floating dust, waiting for attention. Authority without accountability creates monsters. Discipline without empathy becomes cruelty. The chalk marks fade into darkness, symbolic of lives altered, trust betrayed, and innocence lost. The silent classroom, once a theater for control, now serves as a reminder that power, when unchecked, can destroy. The story of the chalk-eating teacher warns us of the danger of unquestioned obedience, the subtle ways manipulation can take hold, and the necessity of oversight in every system where trust is placed. In the end, silence may be the most dangerous weapon, and vigilance the most essential defense. Every shadow, every chalk mark, tells a story, one that demands attention, reflection, and remembrance.